Damn, that boy Garming is power creep. I better keep my ass in floor 10 or I am finished.
Hey guys, Bleep here. Today we're going to be talking about Garming, and first off, I apologize if I am mispronouncing his name, but for this video I'll just call him Garming, and hopefully that's enough. The second thing I want to talk about is his kit. We can just quickly cover that, and then we'll get to my real first impressions. Basically, the main part of his kit is his skill, which is actually his plunge. His talent levels also scale off his skill, not his normal attack for his plunging damage. The damage from plunging attacks is converted to pyro damage, and it cannot be overridden by any other elemental infusions. Upon landing, Garming will consume 15% of his max HP. Now for his burst, it's pretty much just a large number. What his burst does is that it summons a Man-Chai, and this Man-Chai is pretty much your plunge, or not your plunge, but it's pretty much your cooldown on your plunge. When the Man-Chai comes back to Garming, it'll reset your steal cooldown, which means that you can plunge again. His normal attacks are his normal attacks. His Ascension 1 passive restores some of his HP, and his Ascension 4 passive, when he is under 50% HP, he'll gain 20% healing bonus, but when he's 50% HP or more, his plunging attack will deal 20% more damage. Small disclaimer though, as of this recording, I still don't have Jin Yoon, or Cloud Retainer, whatever you want to call her, so I won't be doing any testing with Jin Yoon. Let's go over my build for Garming. First up, you might be asking, why do I have such little attack and so much EM? But this is because I'm using Rain Slasher, because I don't have Serpent Spine, although I do have a Wolf's Gravestone. But the reason I'm not using Wolf's Gravestone and I'm using Rain Slasher actually is because, to put it simply, Rain Slasher is probably just better. Of course, I don't have the weapon calcs or any calcs just yet. But the reason why Rain Slasher is so good and weapons such as Wolf's Gravestone that give a bunch of attack aren't is because Garming really wants EM, and the passive on Rain Slasher is quite useful. As for artifacts, I'm using 4 Marchusei Hunter, which is fine with or without Freno. It's obviously better with Freno, because you can get the stacks faster. His normal attacks are leveled, because you can do a few of them that have Pyro Infusion with C6 Bennett, which I do have. His burst is level 6, because it's just a one-hit thing. It does have a pretty good scaling, but it's still only one hit. But yeah, let's just go into the abyss and do some runs, and perhaps I'll just have some commentary on the side for each team that I've tested. Yeah, let's just get into it. So first off, I do want to say that sometimes the Man-Chi can get very random. Sometimes you can get 6 plunges, 5 plunges, or even 7 plunges, anywhere in between that. Usually it's 6 plunges, which is what I've noticed is the most common. Sometimes when you end the chamber without your burst, or pretty much just low on energy, it can be a pain in the ass to actually get your burst back up on the next chamber. As for Farina, Yelan, Bennett, and Garming, the team itself is pretty strong, but it does lack some AoE. Garming himself does somewhat consolidate AoE, but without a grouper it's very difficult to actually hit 2 or more enemies at the same time. Actually, speaking of single target, or rather in single target, Garming can perform well against bosses that don't move and don't gimp your energy. Weenut and the Ruined Serpent aren't very good examples of where Garming would perform well. The Aeon Blake Drake is actually a good example of where Garming performs well in single target, as in single target, you don't lose any vapes from Farina or Yelan or Xingqiu. With the actual damage that you're doing, you aren't losing any vapes at all, because Farina or Yelan is hitting one enemy, because there's only one enemy, obviously. So Garming can perform well in single target with this team, and probably in most teams. But yeah, this Abyss, he doesn't fare too well against single target content, just because the enemies move a lot, and you do lose Bennett buff if you leave the circle, which does happen pretty often. Speaking of bottom half, you can also run Fischl instead of Yelan as your bow character, but Fischl does have some downsides, I would say. She can sometimes steal the aura, and Garming can just trigger overload and not vape his plunges, which is a massive downside. But on the other hand, you do sometimes get over vapes, which is good damage, but it also has the same issues as Garming teams without Kazuha, as in it's just pretty much only single target. Speaking of single target and Kazuha, you can play Mono Pyro, and I have tested it quite a bit. It's alright, I would say. There's nothing like horrible about it. Xiangling and Kazuha Swirls do give you some AoE, and Kazuha obviously groups enemies. Yeah, that's all I have to say about Mono Pyro. Moving on to the last archetype, which is Melt. It's just really bad. It just sucks. The reason being is that some setups can take quite a bit of time, and Rosaria generally just does less damage than Farina or Fischl or Yelan even. The setups are usually Crow infusing Kazuha's Burst, or you just play with Bennett, Rosaria, Jinyun, and Gaming can actually steal the Pyro Aura sometimes if you have C6 Bennett and end up weaving in normal attacks. So you don't want to weave in normal attacks in Gaming Melt. That way you can get a Crowd Aura on enemies. Melt is kinda just shit. On a final note, if I had to say which teams were the best and which were the worst for Gaming, I would say that his Vape teams and Vape teams with Fischl are probably his strongest teams, with Mono Pyro and Melt being quite a bit weaker than the other teams that I just mentioned. But yeah, I'd say that overall, Gaming is pretty alright, considering I've been testing him at C2. I don't think he's anything special even at C6, but I will probably get an account with C6 Gaming or pull for C6 Gaming myself just to test him further. And that's all for this video. Thank you for watching, and special thanks to Z for editing and making this thumbnail, and that's all. Have a good rest of your day or night.